When the person who humiliated you finally understood what was happening, they did not become wiser in the way they expected. They became exposed, because the very thing they mocked in you was the thing carrying them through the dark they never admitted was there. You have lived through the kind of silence that makes a room feel heavier than its walls, the kind that settles after a sharp word, a cold look, or a dismissal that arrived when you were already tired. And yet, the moment that seemed like your smallest hour may have been the hour when heaven began arranging what pride could not stop. In the middle of that pressure, your chest learned a different rhythm. Your hands learned to hold still, and your spirit learned not to chase applause from people who only understood you after the damage was already done. That is the first turn of this message, because what was spoken against you is not the final word over you. You are not being measured by the bruise they left, but by the way you kept breathing when you had every reason to collapse. There is a hidden dignity in that kind of endurance. And it is not loud. It does not need a witness to be real. It simply stands there like a lamp left burning in a house everyone else thought had gone dark. And if your life has felt like that house, then stay with me, because the light is already speaking in a language humiliation could never learn. I want you to picture a narrow corridor outside a room where a decision was made without your name being defended. The floor is cold, the air is stale, and the chair you sat in felt smaller than your own sorrow. Maybe it was a kitchen table where someone looked through you while speaking, or a work desk where your effort was absorbed, but your voice was ignored. Your body remembers those moments more faithfully than your calendar does, because the shoulders tightened there, the throat closed there, and the heart kept beating, as if it were carrying something sacred that no one else could see. Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you, and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment. That is what makes this hour different. The world may have thought you were being reduced, but something in you was being preserved. There are losses that look like rejection and are really separation. There are doors that close not because you were unwanted, but because the room was too small for what God was preparing to place on your life. The humiliation was real. And so was the sting, but so was the hidden hand that kept you from becoming like the ones who tried to shame you. And that matters, because what insults could not destroy often becomes the very place where character begins to harden into clarity. You were not abandoned in that corridor. You were being taught how to stand without borrowing your identity from the mouths of others. There was a morning when you woke up, and the memory was still sitting beside the bed like an uninvited guest. Maybe the room was quiet, the fan turning overhead, the phone face down on the sheet, and you could feel yesterday in the muscles of your jaw. You did not speak much, because some kinds of pain make words feel expensive. Even so, your body kept telling the truth. The shallow breath, the heavy stomach, the way you stared at ordinary things as if they had lost their shape. That is where many chosen people learn to live for a while, not in triumph, but in the quiet after being misunderstood. And in that quiet, the Lord does not always explain everything at once. Sometimes he allows the silence to stretch until you stop asking the wrong people for the right verdict. What once felt like humiliation can become a sacred unmaking of false approval, because it strips away the need to perform for those who never had the authority to define you. The old self keeps wanting to return to the room and fix the story, but the new self is learning that some stories are not repaired by defending yourself in circles. They are repaired by becoming steady enough to outlast the lie. If you have felt that morning in your bones, then you already know this is not just about what happened to you. It is about what can no longer own you. The person who humiliated you may have believed they were speaking from strength, but strength without humility always turns into blindness. They could see your vulnerability and mistook it for permission. They could see your restraint and called it weakness. They could see your grief and thought it meant you had no answer. Yet there is a difference between silence and surrender, and you knew that difference even when you had no language for it. You kept moving through days that felt crowded with the old accusation, and each small act of faith was a refusal to let their misunderstanding become your identity. This is the spiritual tension at work. Some people only understand a vessel after they watch it hold what they can no longer touch. The humiliation was never proof that you were less. It was proof that your life carried a weight they could not manage. That is why the memory still stirs, because part of you senses that the same scene is being reread from above. What looked like their victory is being exposed as their limitation, and what looked like your loss is being revealed as a mercy that kept you from building your future inside their approval. The contrast is sharp, but it is clear. Pride reaches for control and loses sight. Humility endures and begins to see. The next step is not revenge. It is recognition. You may not have noticed it at first, but there are places in your life where the old shame has started to lose its voice. The same sentence that once crushed you now sounds smaller when it returns in memory. The same room that used to control your breathing now only reminds you that you survived it. That shift is not accidental. It is the quiet consequence of being held together while others expected you to break. When the old interpretation says you were overlooked, the new interpretation says you were guarded. When the old interpretation says you were delayed, the new one says you were being separated from anything built on contempt. That is why this moment matters so deeply, because it changes how you read your own history. You are not the one who was broken beyond repair. You are the one who kept becoming more visible to truth while false voices lost their hold. And there is a line I want you to keep close. What humiliated you could not finish you, and what finished with you in mind never needed to shout. If this is beginning to settle into you, then the next paragraphs will show you where the turning actually started, because the signs were there long before the explanation arrived. It was not one event, but a pattern, like footsteps in a hallway that kept getting closer while the door stayed shut. You noticed it in the unanswered message, in the meeting that moved on without you, in the glance that carried more contempt than the words beside it. You noticed it in the way your own heart became careful, as if it had learned that not every room deserves your full voice. And even then, something deeper was happening than simple hurt. The stripping away was revealing what your peace had been leaning on. Maybe you were leaning too much on being understood, too much on being defended, too much on being included in circles that only valued you when you were useful. Now the floor beneath that dependence has shifted, and the shift feels like grief before it feels like freedom. But grief is not failure. Grief is often the sound of a false foundation being removed from under a life that was meant to stand on something stronger. There is no need to rush past the ache. The ache is part of the correction. It is teaching your spirit to stop calling every loss a punishment. Some losses are actually protection wearing a hard face. Some closed doors are mercy disguised as refusal. And the room that once made you feel small may have been the exact room from which you needed to be delivered. If you have been carrying this story alone in your mind, then you already know how heavy a private wound can become. It follows you into the shower, into the car, into the moments when you are folding clothes or waiting for a kettle to boil, and it keeps asking whether the humbling was the end of the story, but the answer is already moving under the surface. What was meant to diminish you is being turned into discernment. What was meant to shame you is becoming separation from what could never love you well. There is a kind of wisdom that comes only after you stop defending what harmed you, and there is a kind of peace that comes only after you stop begging the same people for the respect they were never ready to give. I know that sounds severe, but the Spirit is often kinder than the crowd because it tells the truth without decoration. It says you do not need to return to the place that taught you to shrink. It says the exit was not a defeat, it was a rescue. And when that truth begins to take root, the memory of the insult changes shape. It no longer sits on top of you like a verdict. It becomes a witness to how much you were carried through. That is why the next part is not about denial. It is about the precise moment pride lost its illusion. The one who humiliated you may now be seeing what they refused to see in real time. They may be piecing together too late that what they treated casually was carrying more purpose than they understood. That recognition can come slowly, in fragments, in the ache of realizing that a person they dismissed was actually standing inside a larger story. And yes, that can feel strange, because part of you never wanted to be proven right by their late understanding. You wanted to be treated right from the start. You wanted the truth to be visible before the wound was named. Yet there is still a strange mercy in this. Their late awakening cannot undo your becoming. Their regret cannot reach back and change the dignity you learned in the dark. The old logic says their recognition should heal you. The deeper truth says your healing was already moving before they ever noticed. That is why your peace now matters more than their apology. Apology can explain a wound. It cannot become the ground your life stands on. Only truth can do that. And the truth is this: you were never less because they misread you. You were never smaller because they spoke over you. You were being prepared for a room they will not be able to occupy with the same ease they once assumed. There comes a point when the body stops trembling from every remembered edge. The shoulders lower a little, the jaw unclenches. The eyes no longer scan every face for the old verdict. That is not forgetfulness, that is recovery. It is the spirit reclaiming territory from an old accusation that overstayed its welcome. And recovery often feels plain from the outside, which is why people miss it. They expect lightning. But healing sometimes arrives as the ability to sit in a room and no longer feel ruled by the room that hurt you. The table may be the same, the chair may be the same, the morning light may still fall across the same floorboards, but you are not the same person inside it. You have been learning how to live without letting humiliation narrate your worth. That is holy work, even when no one claps for it. It is the work of letting the Lord write a quieter, truer story over the bruised places. And if the enemy of your peace tried to make you believe that your pain was the end of your usefulness, then the past months or years have been answering that lie, one ordinary day at a time. A life rebuilt in quiet is still rebuilt. A heart steadied in secret is still steadied. The next shift is already beginning, and it will not ask permission from the voices that once tried to erase you. There is a kind of fear that tries to stay alive by keeping you in yesterday. It repeats the insult, repeats the scene, repeats the sting, as if endless replay could somehow protect you from being hurt again. But replay is not protection. It is a prison with familiar furniture. You know its shape well. You know how it sounds at night when everyone else is asleep and the mind decides to reopen what the day finally closed. Even so, something in you is no longer cooperating with that cycle. The repetition is losing authority. The old sentence is being answered by a newer one. I am still here, and I am not what they said. That sentence is not noise. It is testimony. It tells the truth about survival, and survival, when held by God, is not merely endurance. It becomes evidence of a deeper keeping. You did not get through that season by accident, and you did not keep your footing by human strength alone. There was grace in the minutes you thought were only grit. There was mercy in the choices you made while hurt. There was guidance in the doors that would not reopen. The humiliation wanted your attention to stay locked on the wound, but the Lord was teaching your gaze to move forward without denying what happened behind you. That is a hard education, and it often comes with tears no one sees. Still, it changes everything. If even one of these words is landing where your old pain has been hiding, write the number 888 in the comments and come back to me. Let that simple code mark the moment you recognize that this is more than a story about being hurt. It is a sign of quiet overflow, of something already moving beyond what tried to contain it. Your fingers writing it are not performing. They are agreeing. And agreement matters when a life has spent too long arguing with its own worth. I'm asking you to write it because written agreement becomes a small witness you can return to later. When the memory tries to swallow the meaning, that little line will still be there. 888. Not as magic, not as fear, but as a gentle confirmation that what looked like loss was never the whole account. Type 888, then come back to me. The act of writing it can feel almost too simple for the size of what you have carried, and yet simple obedience often becomes the doorway where complex healing begins. You do not have to explain everything to everyone. You do not have to defend the code, defend the moment, or defend the fact that your spirit recognized something before your mind could fully name it. The old shame likes complicated explanations because complication keeps you busy and weary. But truth is often direct. It says yes or no. It says stay or leave. It says this is for you, and that is not. That little act of agreement is a way of letting the body participate in what the heart already knows. It is also a way of refusing to let the moment disappear into private emotion and then evaporate by morning. Some truths need a mark. Some recognitions need a line written down, because the written line becomes a quiet altar in the middle of ordinary life. And if your hand is still hesitant, that is fine. Hesitation does not cancel sincerity. Sometimes it only shows that the wound was deep enough to make agreement feel risky. But you are safe to agree with what is true. You are safe to name the part of the story that is now being returned to its proper meaning. There are scenes in your life that now read differently because you have crossed through the first shock of them. The message that once felt humiliating may now look like a revelation in disguise. The door that stayed closed may now look like a mercy that spared you from belonging where dignity would have been repeatedly negotiated. The room that made you shrink may now stand in your memory as the place where your spirit started to detach from false approval. This is why so much of spiritual understanding comes after the wound, not before it. It arrives when the heart is finally willing to ask what the pain was guarding. And often, the answer is not punishment. It is protection, formation, and redirecting. You may have wanted a softer path, and that longing was honest, but honesty and timing are not always the same thing. Sometimes the path that bruises you also strips you of what would have trapped you later. That does not make the bruising good. It makes the rescue real. The Lord is not glorified by cruelty, and He does not waste the cruelty others choose. He turns it steadily into a doorway you could not have built yourself. That is the mystery sitting beside your pain now, and it is asking you to trust what is being revealed more than what was spoken over you. There is a point in every long night when even the sound of the room changes. The refrigerator hum, the far-off traffic, the soft click of a ceiling fan all begin to feel less like background noise and more like proof that time is still moving. That is what happens in a soul that has been waiting too long for vindication. It starts hearing small signs of movement again. You may not be able to name the whole future yet, but you can feel that the old sentence is losing volume. The pressure to prove yourself is loosening. The need to return to those who misread you is weakening. That matters more than people realize, because freedom often begins where the urge to revisit the wound starts to fade. The future does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a calmer breath. Sometimes it arrives when you can think of the insult without wanting to collapse under it. Sometimes it arrives as a holy indifference to the opinions that once controlled your mood for days. Do not despise that shift. It is the sound of something being restored in you. The same heart that once flinched can learn steadiness. The same mind that once replayed the humiliation can learn to rest. And the same life that was nearly shaped by contempt can still become a witness to grace that was stronger all along. There is a sentence rising now that the old environment could not teach you. You do not need to be understood by everyone to be held by God. That sentence can change how you enter a room, how you read a look, how you answer a silence. It gives your body permission to stop bracing for the next blow. It gives your spirit permission to stop treating every person as if they hold the keys to your worth. And it gives your history a new frame, one where the humiliation is no longer the center, but a passageway. The world often crowns the loud and forgets the faithful. But heaven does not forget what was done in secret, what was carried without audience, what was endured without applause. You have been carrying a hidden weight, and carrying it has shaped you more than the mockery ever could. Not because pain is noble in itself, but because grace keeps meeting you inside it. The person who wronged you may finally understand the depth of what they touched, but that understanding will come after the fact. Your task now is not to wait for their insight. Your task is to receive your own release. That release is already beginning to sound like peace. It is already beginning to sound like home. If the image I have been walking you through is landing in a place you cannot fully explain, write the words, "I see it," in the comments, and come back to me. Let that phrase stand where recognition became clear. It is a small seal of awareness, and awareness is often the first honest step out of confusion. You do not need to decorate it. You do not need to force a story around it. Just write it as it is and let the moment remain real. I see it, then return to me. You do not have to convince yourself that this is important. The fact that your chest tightened when the truth touched it is enough. The fact that your memory leaned forward is enough. The fact that you felt seen in a place that usually stays hidden is enough. That is why the request is simple. Write the words, mark the moment, and come back. There is something about naming recognition that helps it stay with you longer than a passing feeling. It stops the experience from dissolving into vague inspiration and turns it into remembered agreement. And once agreement is written, it begins to stand beside you in the days that follow. The pain will not vanish by command, but the power of the old interpretation can begin to loosen. The same event can no longer speak with the same authority when you have recognized what it truly was. That is the deep gift of clarity. It does not erase the past. It relocates it. It puts the wound back in its proper place and takes the throne away from it. That is why the next movement matters even more. Something in you is about to stop only surviving the story and begin living beyond it. There are moments when the spirit stops asking why them and starts asking what now. That question is not cold. It is freedom beginning to speak. Because once the humiliation no longer defines you, the future can finally enter the room without apologizing for being different. You may still remember who hurt you. You may still feel the outline of that season when the weather changes or when a certain phrase returns, but memory is no longer master. It is becoming a witness instead. That change is subtle, but it is strong. It lets you look at the old scene and see the limits of the people inside it. They were not omniscient. They were not the measure of your destiny. They were simply human, and human pride is small beside the purposes of God. That does not excuse their behavior. It only keeps their behavior from becoming larger than it deserves. And as that truth settles, your breathing changes again. The room inside you gets wider. The future begins to feel less like a threat and more like terrain you can actually walk on. This is the mercy of discernment. It separates what was true from what was projected. It helps you stop carrying other people's blindness as if it were your identity. There is someone in your life who needs this exact message tonight. Someone quietly tired, someone secretly seeking, someone carrying a posture nobody sees while pretending to be fine. Someone who looks strong but has been praying without words, and whose silence has become heavier than their speech. If their face came to mind as I was speaking, send this to them. Not as a recommendation, as a delivery, the same way it was delivered to you. By appointment. One person may read this and finally breathe differently because you chose to pass it on. Another may remember that they are not the only one who has stood in that corridor of contempt and felt their heart learning how to survive. That is why sharing matters here. It is not marketing, it is care. It is a handoff from one burdened life to another, a quiet way of saying you are not the only one standing in this light. Send it to the one whose name your spirit just touched, and then come back to me. There is a tenderness in recognizing that pain rarely stays private once truth begins to move through it. What was yours can become a pathway for someone else who is still trying to understand why the room felt so cold. And that does not make your wound public property. It makes your healing generative. The same God who met you in the silence can meet another person through the words you pass on. That is part of the mystery of witness. It is never just about being helped. It is about becoming someone through whom help can arrive. So when a face comes to mind, do not dismiss it. Honor it. The person may not need a lecture. They may need exactly this kind of recognition, exactly this kind of quiet certainty, exactly this kind of delivery. And if your own heart feels strangely moved while thinking of them, that may be because the message is doing two things at once. It is reaching outward, and it is still finishing its work in you. That is how sacred language behaves. It does not only inform, it reshapes. It creates a bridge where isolation once stood, and the next bridge is even more personal, because it asks you to step fully into the truth already gathering around your name. Before this closes, write the words "I am chosen" in the comments, not as a wish, not as a hope, as confirmation. Type it slowly. Let your fingers do what your spirit is already doing. You are not declaring a fantasy. You are agreeing with a reality that humiliation could not cancel. Write "I am chosen," then come back to me. That declaration matters because it answers the old lie at its root. The lie said you were random, disposable, easy to dismiss, easy to corner, easy to make small. The declaration answers that you belong to a story with intention in it. It does not erase your pain, but it refuses to let pain be the first or final word. There is a steadiness that comes when a person finally stops bargaining with the opinions that wounded them. Your heart may still tremble a little as you write it, but that tremor is not weakness. It is the body learning to stand under truth after too long under accusation. And once it is written, the truth can echo in you later when the room gets quiet again. It will say you are not overlooked. It will say you are not late. It will say you are not forgotten. It will say the shame that tried to own your name has already lost its claim. That is why the next movement is not a summary. It is the deepening of everything that has already begun to turn. When you look back now, attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life. A guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you. And strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10 Zuru readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who are tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.